Again, my name is Matt Hart, West Hartford's town manager. Thank you so much for joining this evening's public information session on the town's drainage study, very important topic for the town. Before I turn to Mayor Cantor, who has some opening remarks, I just want to announce who we have on the line today. From town staff, we have Dwayne Martin, the town engineer. We also have Julie Vieira, who's one of our civil engineers who works pretty extensively in the drainage area. And then from our consulting team, CDM Smith, we have Joe La Liberty and Cindy Bauman, who will be conducting much of the presentation. I see we've also been joined by Councillor Sweeney here this evening. Good to see you, Liam. Thank you for joining. And then with respect for ground rules for tonight's discussion, these are very important. I'm serving as the moderator. If you're not a presenter, we would ask you to turn off your video just in an effort to share, save bandwidth, so to speak. I will field all the questions. All the questions will need to go through me, and we'll do that following tonight's presentation. And we're going to ask people to speak one at a time. We'll take them in the order in which they called in. And then tonight's presentation, we're really focused on what we call Area 3, and we'll describe what that is in a couple of minutes. So with that as an introduction, I would now turn to Mayor Cantor, who has a welcome for us all. Welcome, Mayor.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody. I hope you've had a safe, healthy, and a happy, although different, Thanksgiving. It did feel a little weird, but anyway, I hope that, again, everyone is safe. And I'm glad this weather at least held off to for Monday rather than Sunday. Thank you for attending tonight. I don't think we have as many people as we had last week. We had a pretty good crowd, a pretty good group of people that signed on for last week's presentation. I really want to thank the town staff for being here again and enlightening as many residents as are interested. And I was going to suggest that because this is on WHC TV, so I think this can be replayed, and we're always available for questions. But we did hire CDM Smith, which is a really, a firm that's been working with us a long time. They've also been working with MDC. But the council prioritized this as a project and have invested money in the studies so we can truly understand this big project and this big challenge that we have facing us. This again will be informative to you, and it was informative to me even this. I think it was the third time I heard it on last Monday. But these are big infrastructure challenges that an older, very mature, developed community faces. And these are things that we have to really talk about and be honest about the challenges it faces, but also how we're going to actually fund a fairly large infrastructure project like this. So I just want to again thank all the people that are participating. I don't know. I've heard there's one person in the audience. I hope there's more that join, but more can be listening on WHCI. And know that this is something that we're going to be discussing additionally. Information is for you. So again, be well, be healthy, be safe, wear your face masks and all that. And back to you, Mr. Hart.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Appreciate your remarks. And Mr. Martin Dwayne has told me we likely have a larger audience tuning in either through YouTube, Facebook, what have you. So thank you again for your opening remarks. And I'd now like to turn to Mr. Martin, who will talk about tonight's agenda before turning the presentation over to CDM Smith. Dwayne.
Thank you, Matt. Again, Dwayne Martin, West Hartford town engineer. Rest assured, we sent out approximately 2,700 notices regarding these two public information meetings. So we were receiving some emails and phone calls around both the first meeting and leading up to this meeting. So the word is out there. And we are putting information on our engineering webpage for both presentations, the PowerPoint and the video. And as the mayor just indicated, we are available for questions. There'll be information at the end of the presentation with our contact information, but it's easily found on the webpage. So yeah, we have CDM Smith here tonight to go over the drainage study as it relates to what we're calling Area 3. I will ask Cindy to start up the PowerPoint so that we have the slides going on the screen as we start this. While she's doing that, I will mention that there was some confusion that came out of the first meeting and perhaps applies to this meeting as well with respect to the scope of the study. And we did receive some questions from residents that were asking about private flooding issues, like they have drainage issues in their backyard. Does the study address those? And the answer is that's outside of the scope. So the study wasn't really intended to address private drainage issues, although there may be an indirect benefit or something the residents are able to do to improve their own yards once the town has an improved drainage system in the street. The scope of this project was really to review the existing street drainage system for a sizable rain event where in the past we've had street flooding. In some cases, it would last quite a while, which is a concern for emergency responders and people to have access to and from their homes. That's the primary concern that we have. In some instances, the street flooding would spread onto private property, and that could create some issues, whether it's yard flooding or even basement flooding. That's a whole other matter, and something that we are interested in correcting or preventing, rather, if we can. So that was included in the drainage study. And again, so the focus tonight is to go through what we found out through the drainage study in Area 3. And Cindy, are you able to?
I am not able to share, and
Okay. That might be my fault.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Come on. Yeah. Start from the beginning. Can you see the presentation, or am I not sharing it?
Yes,
We can see it, Cindy.
Okay. Okay. And so as Mr. Hart had mentioned, these are the people that have been involved in the drainage study, both on the West Hartford town side as well as CDM Smith side. And then Mr. Hart also went over the ground rules, and we'll remind you of these at the end when we open it up for questions as well. And so our agenda, we are going to go over the project overview, some existing conditions. We developed recommendations, and then we did costs as well. We have some funding options to discuss, and then the project timeline. The figure that's shown on this graph on this slide shows 6 areas, and we have completed areas 1, 2, and 3. And then we are working on areas 4, 5, and 6, which will go into areas 1, 2, and 3 a little further in the presentation, and we are going to focus on area 3 in this public meeting. And that's area 3 that's shown in green. So the project overview, as I had stated, there's 6 areas, and we've completed areas 1, 2, and 3, which are the brown and orange and tan colors. And then we're currently working on areas 4, 5, and 6, which are the green colors, the areas shown in green. And there was significant flooding in all 6 areas, and the events that we looked at were in 2018 and 2019. There were 3 significant storm events. We did have our first public meeting in June of 2019 to kick off this project for areas 1, 2, and 3, and we have completed that phase 1 for areas 1, 2, and 3. And we're currently having our second public meetings. We had one last Monday, as the mayor had mentioned, and then we have one tonight. And we're currently working on area 4, 5, and 6, which we refer to as phase 2. So the drainage project scope included data collection. So we obtained a lot of survey from the town, and we also hired a field surveying firm to go out and collect information on the drainage system. And then we also installed meters within the drainage system so we could get an idea of what actually happens within the systems during storm events. We developed models for the drainage systems. And then we developed alternatives looking at whether the drainage systems were exceeded for either the 3 local storms or the 10-year design storm, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we developed recommendations. And tonight's presentation, we're focusing on the Lynbrook area, which is shown here, which is area 3, which has Trout Brook to the right. And then Trout Brook does curve around within area 3. And then it also includes the South Loomis Drive area, and then up through to where Mount Clair is as well. So the project status, we have completed the public kickoff meetings and the phase 1 drainage study in these 3 areas, and we've prioritized improvements. And now we're continuing work in these 3 areas. We're also looking into funding sources for the current recommendations as a result of phase 1. And we're also continuing our coordination with MDC to assist with some of the problems within all areas. So for existing conditions, I wanted to kind of just go over some basics because there's actually 2 systems within majority of the roadways within the areas. And one is the sanitary sewer main, as shown in the middle of this graphic. And that has your sewer lateral coming out of your building that takes your plumbing, whether it's your shower or your toilet or your sinks. It also can have floor drains connected to it, sump pumps. It can have foundation drains. It can have roof leaders, all connected to the sewer. And then there's the drainage system, and that's what we're looking at today, and that's what we've studied as part of this project. And it takes the stormwater, so the surface water, through catch basins that then tie into the storm drain. And as shown on this graphic, there's a lot of cracks shown, and that's what actually exacerbates the situation in both systems, and it allows infiltration through groundwater. And then we also get inflow into the sewer system through your roof leaders or your foundation drains, which also causes exceedances of capacity within the sanitary sewer main. And those type of connections, so the roof leaders collecting stormwater runoff, and then the foundation drains and some pumps that collect groundwater, they should actually be tied into the storm drainage system. So we did model development for all of the 21 drainage systems within areas 1, 2, and 3. And we installed 5 flow meters to help with the calibration and the validation of these drainage systems, modeling them. And then we modeled the drainage systems for the 3 scenarios that I mentioned before, which were the 2 storms in 2018 and the 1 in 2019, as well as the 10-year design storm. And it's important to note that typically people look at a 10-year design storm as occurring every 10 years, but it's better to look at it that it's a 10% chance of occurring in any given year. So the 21 systems that we modeled, we evaluated them with respect to exceedances. And the 4 scenarios that we looked at for exceedances were those 3 local storms in 2018 and 2019, as well as the 10-year design storm. So this table shows all 21 systems and the areas that they are in, whether they are in areas 1, 2, or 3. And then if they are highlighted in red or bolded in red, that means they had modeled exceedances for all 4 scenarios. the 3 local storms, as well as the 10-year design storm. Those that are bold in black, they had an exceedance only for the 10-year design storm. And those that are not bold, they did not have any exceedances for any of the 4 scenarios that were modeled. And this is important because this helped us do the prioritization, which I will talk to you about in a few slides. The other information that we gathered and incorporated into the study was the private inflow removal program that the Metropolitan District Commission did. And it was about 10 years ago that they performed house inspections, and they identified about 38% of the houses that they inspected needed to have their private inflow removed from the sewer and tied into a drainage system. And so within Area 3, those houses that were identified in red on this graphic are the ones that have known private inflow. There could be additional private inflow locations if the MDC was not able to inspect your home in that time frame about 10 years ago when they conducted this study. So just a little more background on the items that are typically connected to the sewer. And so the graphic on the left shows you where you do have your roof leader, you have your floor drain or your foundation drains, and then you also have your fixtures within your building all connected to the sewer. But the way that you want to do it is to have anything that collects rain or groundwater to connect to the drainage system. So we would be disconnecting your roof leaders and disconnecting your sump pumps or your foundation drains and tying them into the town drainage system. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about, we did a groundwater assessment, and we did obtain these videos from residents within Area 3. And I thought I'd just kind of go through them so that you can see. This first one actually shows some backyard flooding. And then they will pan to the left, and we're going to zoom in on an area where there's actually some groundwater seeping up into this big puddle. Yeah, so now they're actually going to zoom into an area right next to a tree, and you will see bubbling water coming up through the ground. Right there. I'll zoom in. So you have actually groundwater bubbling up in people's backyards because the groundwater is so high. And then the other scenario, you actually have groundwater bubbling up through foundation cracks. Whoops. Okay, hold on. And so what we did as part of this project, we did an assessment of groundwater. And so I will give you the results of our preliminary screening. So we did a screening of groundwater. We obtained information that was already available. So we did get information on the U.S. Geological Service well that's in the upper right corner of this graphic. And then we also obtained some groundwater information from the Metropolitan District Commission that had it within Area 3. And so this graphic shows you, based on our evaluation of groundwater, that it shows those areas within the purple have a depth to groundwater within 10 feet, but then those within the area of green, and you can see Mount Clair Drive there, has groundwater within 5 feet of the surface. So you can blow up the area And you can see that the homes then in this Mount Clair Drive and Clifford Drive area would, based on this model, the screening level model, would have groundwater within 5 feet of the surface, which coincides with what we've heard from the residents and what we see out there in Area 3. So the other thing that we looked at were collector drainage systems, and this is a plan that was done for the Greenhurst Road project, which is an area within West Hartford where they already installed collector drains and already removed homes, removed the foundation drains and sump pumps and connected them to the new collector drainage system. And so there are drainage extensions, which is a new line down an existing road that doesn't have a drainage system. And then there's collector drains that will run under the sidewalk where then you can tie your foundation drain or sump pump connection to those collector drains, which then connect into a downstream manhole or catch basin. So now I'll go into the recommendations that we developed for Area 3. So we did develop recommendations for the drainage system improvements and also for collector drains. And this shows you the Lynbrook and Leonard area where the black numbers are shown as existing pipes, and then the green would be the size if it were designed for a 10-year design storm. And so you can see in this area, especially Leonard Road, you can see that, you know, it's anywhere from going from a 12 to an 18 inch, but you get farther down and you have a 24 inch that has to really be a 36 inch. And so these proposed drains were designed for that 10-year design storm to collect all the surface runoff within that area. So, and then also on this graphic, you do see some new drain extensions. And then you see which are the solid red, and then you do see your collector drains, which are the dash lines. And then you also have the highlighted green buildings are the private inflows that were identified by the Metropolitan District Commission under their project. So the drainage system prioritization, we have 3 tiers. The first tier is the high priority. So that is where there was documented and modeled flooding. And the modeled flooding had exceedances for all 4 of those scenarios. And then we had a second tier, which is a moderate priority. And this is where they had modeled flooding for both the historical and the 10-year design storm. So they still had 4 storms that were exceeded for the 4 scenarios that were exceeded during the modeling of that system. And then the last tier is a low priority, where they did not show exceedances when modeled for the local storms, the 2018 and 2019 storms, but they did have exceedances for the 10-year design storm. And of the 21 systems, there's 13 that were prioritized as a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. So these are the 13 drainage systems that were designed for a 10-year design storm, and you can see the tiers, whether they're a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3. Tier 1s are shown in red, tier 2s are shown in green, and then tier 3s are shown in black. And the feet area actually has different segments. That is in area 1, and so you do see that some different segments had different tiers based on their capacity of the existing system. And the collector drain system, so for all of the drainage systems within Area 3, we developed collector drains or design collector drains. And so this kind of shows just a blow up of that same area just a little farther south, and it does show the green buildings are the ones that were identified by MDC that need to have their disconnection from the sewer and tied into a drainage system. And then we did design drain extensions. They're shown in a solid line, and new catch basins are shown in red. And then also the collector drains, which are the dashed lines. And so now I'll go into costs for the recommendations. And so the drainage system, so this is just the pipes that were green where they're Drainage systems have been upsized to accommodate the 10-year storm. And as you can see for the tier 1 projects, there's the recommendations have different design costs, design and installation costs. But for all 13 improvements, we do have $42 million proposed for all 13 recommendations. And then we have separate costs for the collector drainage system. And so once again, the 3 that were tier 1s have been highlighted in red, and these are the different quantities for the collector drainage system as well as the costs associated with those improvements. And now funding options. So we did also look into different funding options, and it's important to note that all funding options require the town capital improvements bonding. So regardless of what type of funding the town decides to pursue or to implement, they do need capital improvements bonding. So we did look at 2 state and federal. These are both FEMA programs. So there's the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities, and then the Flood Mitigation Assistance. Both of these are due in January, and the town is currently looking into both of these programs to get funding for this project. And then there's 2 other ones that they did look into, we've looked into as well. The Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, WIFIA, and then the Connecticut DEP Clean Water Fund and state revolving funds, which are loans. And those have later deadlines, so the town currently is focusing on the first 2 that are in green. And the other thing that we looked into was the Stormwater Utility. And so we provided a lot of information with respect to establishing a utility, the benefits of a utility, and what it does is it creates an equitable funding source for stormwater. And so those properties that have more impervious area would actually be paying more towards the stormwater funds as opposed to those with less impervious area. Because currently your funding comes from just your general funds for stormwater, and it's disproportional to who has more impervious area. So this makes it more equitable, so the residents actually end up paying less because they have less impervious area than something large like a big box store or even a university or a church or other buildings that have a lot of impervious area. So the next steps. So we have completed phase 1. The final report was issued in June. We had a town council workshop last month, and we're having our public information meetings last Monday and this Monday. The grant submissions, as I mentioned, are due in January, and the town is working on that. We are continuing our coordination with the Metropolitan District Commission. And then we just are asking people to support a stormwater utility legislation. And then with respect to phase 2, we have started evaluating the areas 4, 5, and 6 for phase 2. And we anticipate having a draft drainage study in February. And then in the spring, having public information meetings and a town council meeting at that time for that phase. And now I just have, I'll reiterate the contacts. So both Dwayne Martin and Julie Vieira are with the town of West Hartford, and then Joe LaLiberty and myself have been working on this project with CDM Smith. And then we have provided the web page at the bottom of the screen. There's a lot of information on there with respect to this project, and so you can take a look there. And the presentations are put there as well, so you can see them. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate your presentation. I'd like to just add a couple of comments, if I could, before we open it up for Q&A. And one of the things that we are contemplating here, and Cindy touched on it, is joint projects, good coordination with the MDC, with the Metropolitan District Commission, in terms of how we approach, how we design, and how we fund these important infrastructure projects. So we've had some conversations with the MDC in the relatively recent past. You know, they share an interest in this as well, but we need to continue those conversations in terms of how we approach it. You know, one potential scenario could be where the town is responsible for the infrastructure that's in the street, that's in the right of way, and the MDC takes the lead on the lateral connection from the home to the line in the street. So that's one point I wanted to touch on. And then secondly, Cindy talked about stormwater utility legislation. You know, what's that all about? What are we talking about here? In Connecticut right now, municipalities do not have the ability to establish local stormwater utilities. Other states do, I think including the state of Massachusetts, state of Maine. They've had some good experience there. And that's something we want to look into and see if that model could work for West Hartford and other municipalities within the state of Connecticut. So I just want to touch on those 2 points before we open it up to Q&A. So now for Q&A, I believe we've got a couple of folks who called in. And Ms. Reinheimer, Jerida is going to recognize you, I think, by your phone line. And in order to speak, you need to hit *6 in order to speak. Ms. Reinheimer, do you want to turn to our first caller to see if they have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hart. I will state that there's only one caller on the line at the moment. I'm going to now unmute phone number whose line ends in 71. I've unmuted you. You may *6 to start speaking. We're going to move on to the next caller. Caller whose phone number ends in 48. I've unmuted your line. You may *6.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Very good. So I have a home on Montclair Drive, and there is typically a fairly good-sized pond in the area in the center of the horseshoe. A number of houses have a lot of standing water today, and during some wet periods, the standing water can stick around for weeks. And so I'm very curious about what, I know you're saying that the plan doesn't involve removing water from yards, but is it, what would be the thoughts about drains that would tie into the stormwater system that would remove water from yards and funding for something like that?
Good question. Thank you, sir. And we can certainly address that. Dwayne, do you want to start off and turn to Joe and Cindy as needed?
Sure, I can take that, Matt. It's Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer. So the study that was completed analyzed the street drainage system and took into account that there may be drainage coming off of private properties into the public street right away and into the pipe. So obviously we wanted to calculate and figure the appropriate size pipe to install. And in some cases it was adequate, in some cases it needed to be enlarged. But we did factor that in order to allow private properties to connect. And so it would in a sense set the table for that. I will hand it off to Joe. I don't know, Joe, if you have anything to add with respect to how the study went about calculating that, or specifically in this neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you, Dwayne. Joe LaLiberty with CDM Smith. So just to add on to what Dwayne, was saying is the drainage that will be designed in the street, the drainage pipes will be adequate for taking the flow that's in the backyards. It's just, and we could even, possibly leave a stub or something for the private property owners to tie into. But the town's procedure is that they would not extend that drain onto private property because they have similar situations in many areas throughout the town.
Yeah, Joe, this is Matt Hart. Just to follow up on that. So under that scenario, first we would seek to make sure that the line in the street is adequate. We could put the stub in place, and then the homeowner, as their project at their expense, they could make that connection from, their lawn to the line in the street, correct?
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
And that's how many municipalities might handle this sort of thing.
Correct.
All right. So let me just check with that caller to see if he had a follow-up question. I don't believe he's on anymore. Ms. Reinheimer, can you turn to Mr. Bush next, see if he has any questions? And I can't see if anybody else has called in.
Certainly. I've now gone ahead and unmuted Mr. Bush.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Rick.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I appreciate you all spending all this time on this particular project. I know that there's a lot of people who are impacted fairly substantially. Otherwise, we wouldn't be looking at a $42 million project. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to add, was that want to make sure that the integrated plan, which has been part of the MDC's, talking points for the last couple of years, is integrated with this project. Do you have any specific coordination that has been already discussed as it relates to the integrated plan, and what kind of cost sharing the MDC would participate in as part of this particular phase of the project?
Yeah, let me start off, and then I can turn to Dwayne and Joe as appropriate. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Thank you for the good question, Rick. So, we certainly see this initiative as compatible and in furtherance of the goals of the integrated plan, right? Removing more stormwater from the sewer system. Clearly consistent with that goal. What we've talked about in a more general way as a cost-sharing approach, and our costs in the study align with this, is that the town would be responsible for financing the infrastructure in the right-of-way, whether that's through our own bonding or obtaining federal grant funding, or perhaps a combination thereof. So the town would be responsible for what's in the right-of-way, and the MDC would handle the connection from the home to the right-of-way. So that's what we have discussed in general with the MDC in the past. We think that is a good option and a good suggestion, and something that we want to continue that dialogue. We plan to continue that dialogue with the MDC. I will now turn to Joe to see if he wants to add anything, given his extensive knowledge of the integrated plan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hart. Joe Liberty with CDM Smith. Hi, Rick. How are you? Yeah, so the MDC is aware. They are proceeding with, the integrated plan approval. We started with 3 large volumes, you may recall, that got narrowed down to about a 60-page executive summary. I think you might have seen that as well. That was the final version of that was submitted in May of 2020, and now we are at the point where that the 3 volumes that was summarized in 60 pages is now down to 5 pages that we're in the process of submitting to DEP this week, which would be the first phase of implementation, which would probably cover about 7 or 8 years. So DEP had noted to MDC that they're in general agreement with the integrated plan, but that they didn't want to necessarily agree to a 40-year schedule at this point. So what their preference is to agree to a phase plan where they basically will agree to the first 7 years worth of projects. That said, MDC certainly is aware of the costs that would be associated. They've been sent the cost for the private property work that Mr. Hart had mentioned, so they're aware of those costs. But they also are at a point in time where the referendum 1 and 2 budget is pretty much all spoken for, or will be spoken for, as the tunnel, the south tunnel through Hartford progresses. So chances are they will need a separate funding source, likely a third referendum. And so once the plan gets approved, they would start to move down that process. So, but this project that probably would take, a little bit for design, probably won't go to construction, for a year or two. So hopefully the timing all works out where the MDC's funding is in place and that they are able to participate in the project. But nobody from MDC obviously is on the call, and I can't speak for them. So I hope that answered your question, Mr. Bush.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, for that. Matt Hart here. I understand that Rick, Mr. Bush has a follow-up question. So can you unmute him again, Ms. Reinheimer?
All right. Yeah. Thank you for unmuting me again. I appreciate it. Those were good answers. I think, again, I unfortunately missed out on the, sorry, I'm in a very echoey chamber here. I missed out on the visual part of the presentation in the beginning. I was listening to it, so I think I understand pretty much what was going on. And I guess part of the follow-up question is regarding the Montclair-Lynbrook area. All of those roads were just recently paved after, a couple of years of construction that was going on. Does the town plan to spend all the money to dig up those roads again in this project? And I know you just said it was a approximately two-year time frame, but that's part of what we're talking about as far as allocating money for the town budget as it relates to this particular neighborhood that was just recently finished. And I'm going to just throw this on the end of that. As we move forward in this town-wide project in all these areas, obviously we want to coordinate with the MDC, and they made it clear that they're willing to coordinate with the town in order for us to not waste money by redigging up, the streets that have recently been paved and all the new streetscaping that's been done. And I have noticed around town that there's been a lot of curb work on Oakwood Avenue and stuff like that. Are we making sure as a town that we're coordinating any future streetscaping work with the MDC's integrated plan? I know that was a lot, so I'll stop and see if there's a response to that.
All right. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Mr. Bush. I'll start and then turn to Mr. Martin. So yes, we do work to coordinate with the MDC to the extent we can. One example I would point to is there are some number of streets we'd like to repave in the center, and we've been holding off on those in order to give the MDC and other utilities time to complete their work. But Mr. Martin, Dwayne, can you talk about, with respect to this project and the fact that we relatively recently, and I can't recall if it was repaving or reconstruction of Lynbrook, how we would approach that? Thank you.
Sure. Again, it's Dwayne Martin, West Hartford Town Engineer. And just generally speaking, we coordinate all of our paving projects with the two utility companies that predominantly do utility renewal projects or additions, which is the MDC and CNG. There's constant interaction between us and them to coordinate our construction projects. As you can imagine, there's a lot of fluidity to our schedules, so it's very important to do that. With respect to this neighborhood and this study, there's still a lot of variables. There's still some unknowns. Funding, whether it's grant or bonded, is still up in the air and needs to be resolved, and that will change or relate to the schedule as we move forward. So the schedule as far as, let's say, Lynbrook, if we wanted to replace the drainage as shown in the study, is going to take some time to get there, just the survey design alone. In the meantime, we have roads that are in need of repaving. So it's always a tricky situation. We don't want the roads to be left in a rough shape while we're trying to figure out the schedules, but at the same time, we want to get these projects done. So moving forward, we will continue to coordinate as we have. It's just going to create a little bit more challenges because we're trying to do more work. And so We didn't want to wait. We wanted to follow the MDC's project to repair Lynbrook and a couple other roads in the neighborhood. But here we are now with a study showing that with respect to Lynbrook and a couple other streets in the neighborhood, we could replace or improve the drainage system. Part of that is still interacting with the MDC, as was just mentioned, with respect to what extent are we doing work in the neighborhood? Is it just simply replacing the storm drainage to increase its capacity? Or are we extending the scope of work to include disconnecting houses from the MDC sewers and connecting it to new drainage, which then would necessitate even more excavation in the neighborhood for collector drains, perhaps even impacting private properties to connect those houses. So it can get very complicated and require a lot of coordination, but that's certainly something that is worthwhile to do, and we will continue to do that and figure that out. I do not know off the top of my head when we would be working on Lynbrook, whether it's a year, 3 years, 5 years, I don't know. Those are the types of things that we need to figure out and communicate with each street that we're going to be working on, as well as the utility companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Rick, Mr. Bush, any follow-up questions?
Dwayne, that was a fantastic response. Really appreciate that. Clearly, you're in the know with that what's going on, and it was clear. That was just great. No, I mean, at this point, I think we really just need to focus on trying to get the money. I mean, looking for some grants would be great. I think if we can just focus on figuring out how we're going to pay for it without necessarily burdening the taxpayers in the town of West Hartford with additional taxes. I just want to say that I'm available. I have if there's anything that I can do to communicate to DEP or to MDC or do whatever, I'm available to be a liaison or write a grant proposal or whatever needs to be done. But I clearly this is in good hands at this point. And I could not be more pleased with even the speed. Even for me, 2 to 3 to 5 years seems like a short period of time for this massive a project. So I really appreciate the work that the town has done to get us this far. So that's my follow-up. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rick, and we appreciate your support and your assistance as one of our representatives on the MDC. Thank you for serving in that important role.
My pleasure.
Ms. Reinheimer, anyone else join us?
Mr. Hart, I will now unmute line whose phone number ends in 20. Caller whose phone number ends in 20, you may unmute your phone now.
And in order to speak, they need to hit *6, correct? Looks like they have.
Yes.
I'm Terry Thompson here. Thank you very much for taking my call. I just want to commend you guys on this study. You and Dwayne and the folks have done a great job here. I'm very impressed with what I heard tonight. Very impressed with the progress. I think you guys have really gotten this together. Obviously, I look forward to the next piece of this study that's done in the next phases. But I commend you guys for everything you guys have done so far. I think you guys have done a great job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conlon, Terry. We appreciate that, and we appreciate your assistance with making sure all of your neighbors are informed as well. That's been very helpful.
Thank you.
Ms. Reinheimer, do we have anyone else who might have joined us?
No, we don't, Mr. Hart.
Okay, so lastly, I'd like to turn to Mr. Martin, who can talk about when we will post these presentations and where members of the public can find them. Dwayne?
Thank you, Matt. I would ask Cindy to advance the slide to the contact information, but essentially the answer to your question, Matt, is the Town of West Hartford's engineering webpage will contain the PowerPoint presentation as well as the video presentation for tonight. We posted it from the meeting. Thank you, Cindy. We posted the information on our webpage from the previous meeting last Monday. We will continue to add content to that webpage as we move forward with the second phase study for areas 4, 5, and 6. And welcome any questions or comments to our office. We will do the best we can to get that information responded to. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Mr. Martin, Matt Hart, Town Manager here. I'd like to thank Julie Vieira and Cindy Bauman and Joe Law Liberty for their extremely valuable assistance in putting this together. Their good hard work on the study to date. Obviously, we've got some steps to take still, but we've made good progress and see this as a very important project for the town. Would like to thank Mayor Cantor and all of her fellow town council members for their support. Ms. Reinheimer and Ms. Evans for helping us out with tonight's presentation, recording the meeting and making it sure that it will be available for members of the public. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Please feel free to, please check out these materials online and feel free to contact us with any questions, and would like to wish everyone a safe and healthy holiday season. I understand it's very trying times for us all, but very proud, as the mayor said, as to how the town of West Hartford has been responding to date. Thank you again, everybody. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care now.